Hearty welcome here from Aarhus. My name is Rainer Arzbach. I'm Associate Professor in Historical Archaeology, and I'll be your technical host. Now I leave the floor to the director of our research program, Materials, Culture and Heritage, Associate Professor David Harvey.
Thank you very much, Rainer, and welcome everybody to this event. Really looking forward to this event in the Materials, Culture, Heritage program. And have to say from the outset, first of all, apologies for the slightly clunky nature of these webinars. This is a university protocol, so I'm afraid we can't see your photos or your pictures for the attendees, and you can't involve yourself in the chat. But that's what Rainer has outlined in terms of the way we're managing this in order to try and have some as best interaction as we can. So welcome to this event. As I said, I was looking forward to this for quite some time. The one and only time I've ever been to Alexandria was actually Christmas 1990, and had a wonderful few weeks there with staying with some friends. I guess Alexandria will have changed a little bit since then, and but I've got a nostalgic feel for the place in a way, and maybe that's a good way to introduce this, because the Materials, Culture, Heritage program, it connects archaeology from all different eras, but also towards heritage studies and the way that the past is presented in the present, and that sort of future orientation. And issues about commemoration, community engagement as well come into this, and sort of a quite contemporary social elements to it. And I feel this event this afternoon, particularly with both Wesam and Kathrin's presentations, really speak to those core ambitions of the material, culture, heritage framing and our missions. So like to say hearty welcome, as Ryan has already said, and to the program. This is our last event of this academic year before the long summer recess. So you've got a really nice slot to bring people together in the sunshine, as it is here in Aarhus, to discuss the fortifications and heritage history of Alexandria. So I'll pass on now to Christian.
Thank you, David. Also from me, a very warm welcome to you all, dear guests and friends of our lecture series, Strongholds of the World. It's also a pleasure for me to welcome you in the name of the Department of Archaeology and Heritage Studies of Aarhus University and the Marburg Working Group for European Castle Research to our third session. Our idea was to present a worldwide look on castles and fortifications, and mainly on non-European strongholds, opening the view on the phenomenon of fortified sites and their cultural background. So I'm the first chairman of the Marburg Working Group, Christian Ottersbach. For all who don't know us shortly, our small society was founded at Marburg University in 1996 by, at that time, students and young academics of art history, history, and archaeology. One of our members is Professor Rainer Arzbach, archaeologist, and I am glad that we have with him a good connection and relationship to this Aarhus University. Without its power, we couldn't have organized such an international virtual lecture series via Zoom. And by the way, I have warmly also to give my thanks again in the name of our society to its chief, David Harvey, for the possibility to organize this lecture series in collaboration with Aarhus University and his kindly support. Our virtual tour today will lead us to one of the most famous cities in the Mediterranean, the legendary Alexandria. It is best known for the famous Pharos, which has gone, but it was later replaced by a fort that we will visit in our lecture today. We have two parts today. First, we will have a short introduction in the history and archaeology of Wesam Mohammed, and then our main lecture by Kathrin Machinek about Alexandria's urban fortifications under Mamluk and Ottoman rule. I may introduce to you first Wesam Mohammed. She's in the moment FIDI student at Aarhus University, researching the community participation in protecting cultural heritage in times of crisis. Basically, she is museum curator in Egypt. This is her permanent position at the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt. Wesam Mohammed has been working in many museums in Egypt. It is the Grand Egyptian Museum, Cairo Museum, also at the Minister's Office, and international with the British Museum. She is really an expert in Egyptian archaeology, and I'm looking forward to her short introduction about Alexandria. It's yours, Wesam. Thank you that you have time for us.
Thank you, Christian. I'm trying to start my slide or sharing my presentation. Just give me a second, it's already open. Yes, that's it. So today I'm only giving an introduction to Kathrin's presentation by mentioning some historical background about the city of Alexandria, or as we say in Egypt, Alexandria. So this is where Alexandria is. It's in the Mediterranean Sea, the northern part of Egypt, and it was and still the northern gate between Egypt and Europe. So what everyone knows about Alexandria is that it was created or established by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, and Alexander the Great didn't see the city, but after he died, Ptolemy I continued the establishment of Alexandria. But actually, Alexandria was there partially before Alexander the Great. So there was a small village that was named Reket or Rakotis in the ancient Greek, or Rakuda in Arabic. And there was the Faroes Islands, which has the oldest harbor in the area. So what Alexander the Great did is to fill the sea or the water between Faroes Islands and the villages in this area, including Rakuda. And he gave orders to Democritus of Rhodes, the architect, to establish the city in this area. And he decided to name the city after his name, Alexandria. But actually, Alexander the Great didn't see the city because he died before he could return back to Egypt. And by that time, Alexandria was kind of military city. But after this, during the Ptolemaic period, it started to be one of the most flourished cities in the Mediterranean. During the Ptolemaic period, the kings and the emperors of the Greek, let's say the Greek, ancient Greek, they started to build new establishments in the city. They wanted the city to be the capital of Egypt, but also the capital of the arts and also the science in the ancient world. They started with the lighthouse of Alexandria, the ancient, of course, library of Alexandria. This is an image for the new one. And also they started to build the kind of first known public museum that was the Museum of Alexandria. And this is the facade of the Greco-Roman Museum, which is closed now for renovation. And it's one of the most important museums in Egypt, by the way. And on the facade, we still can see that the architects who built the museum wrote Museum just to refer to the oldest museum in Egypt. So after so many years of being, let's say, the most important city in Egypt, then there was, of course, the very famous story and fight between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra VII. And finally, on 47 BC, Alexandria became part of the Roman Empire. From these two periods, we call in Egypt those two periods like the Greco-Roman period. We have many archaeology and many remains of the Antiquities of those two periods. And it's so interesting to see how they were mixed together with the ancient Egyptian traditions of art. This is, for example, the catacombs of Alexandria. It's 4 floors under the ground with a very tragic staircase. And it has many, many tombs inside. This is also the Roman theater in Alexandria, one of the very famous sites, but also known for the mysterious submerged archaeology that was discovered during the last 20 years by the end of the 20th century. And from these objects, we can see like 6 meters and 7 meters, very huge statues and stelae. So comparing Alexandria to other cities of Egypt, we can say that not many of Alexandria antiquities has been remained. And of course, we have many monuments in Alexandria, but compared to other cities, I mean, this is Egypt, we should have more than this. But also the nature of the Delta and the cities in the north are different than the south of Egypt because of the weather and the nature of the ground itself. So mainly we have more antiquities in the south more than the north. Also, Ammianus Marcellinus, the Roman soldier and historian, mentioned that there was an earthquake and tsunami that affected Alexandria and Crete in 365 AD. And this was not the only earthquake in the area, but there was many other earthquakes that affected Alexandria and destroyed many sites. During the reign of Flavius Theodosius, the emperor, the Roman emperor, and the patriarch of Alexandria, Theophilus, there was a prohibition for the pagan religions. And for this reason, they started to destroy the monuments of the people who were not Christian, but this time. Also, during the British occupation, there was many attacks on Alexandria, and again, during the World War II, especially by the German and Italian forces. In the 7th century AD, Alexandria was the last city in Egypt that follows Islam, because Egypt by that time became a Muslim country. So I'm not going to speak about the Muslim period because Kathrin will speak about this in detail. During the modern era, Muhammad Ali family, they paid so much interest in Alexandria. They built palaces and factories, and they tried to return back some of the glory of the city. When Napoleon Bonaparte came to Egypt in 1798, he came through Egypt. And again, there was a fight between the French forces and the British forces in Alexandria. And again, the city lost some of its buildings. So Alexandria to us, to Egyptians till today, it's the main harbor for Egypt, and it's really, really important for the Egyptian economy. And also another thing that people all the time say about Alexandria, that it's a kind of cosmopolitan city, because the city itself, the population in Alexandria, they are not only Egyptians, there are many other foreigners who came to Egypt and to Alexandria and lived there like forever, especially people from Greece, from Armenia, and other nationalities as well. In Alexandria, Gamal Abdel Nasser declared the nationalization of the Suez Canal, and this is very important also to Egyptians. And also Alexandria to us, to Egyptians, was for so many years like the only summer city or the beach. That's when we, for example, we say that we are going to the beach, we say we're going to Alexandria. We don't say that we're going to other city or we are going to summer city or something like this, although we have so many other cities by the sea. Alexandria in heritage in general, they are very different than other cities in Egypt. The way they talk, the way they act, the way they choose their clothes. This is, for example, one of the traditional clothes in Alexandria that was there, I think, until the 80s. And I can say that this is somehow derived from the Greco-Roman costumes, especially those ties and layers. And another thing is the Alexandrian accent. We can easily recognize that the person who is talking is from Alexandria. They have this their own accent, they have their own expressions. One last thing to mention about Alexandria in the heritage, or let's say the dark heritage of Egypt, that Alexandria was the home for the most famous serial killers in Egypt, Raya and Sakina, in 1990. Those two ladies succeeded to kill 17 women, or more than 17 women, to get their gold. It's known that in Egypt, women like gold, and every woman has to have some kind of gold. So they were trying to get rich, and this is their house, and it's one of the most visited places in Alexandria. So this was just small introduction, just to know something about the city before Kathrin's talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wesam. Are there some questions?
I don't see any question in our question and answer section.
Okay. So I would come to our next speaker. I may introduce to you Dr. Kathrin Machinek. She's research engineer at the French CNRS, Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, is working in the moment as a building historian at the Centre d'études Alexandrines in Alexandria under the direction of Dr. Marie-Dominique Nena. She studied architecture at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. After that, she worked for various architectural offices and big German and Alexandrian building companies. She participated at some archaeological campaigns of the German Archaeological Institute in Turkey at Pergamon. Kathrin Machinek obtained a FIDI in architecture at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology about the topic The Kite Fort in Alexandria, History and Architecture of a Mamluk Fortress in the Urban Defense System of Alexandria. Last but not least, she is a member of the Marburg Arbeitskreis für Europäische Burgenforschung, so of our society. Her main research themes are military history and fortifications of Alexandria, Islamic fortifications from the Middle Ages to the modern times, medieval and Ottoman Alexandria, Mamluk architecture, archaeological excavations at Fort Kite Bay and Fort Tabiet Nahrazin in Alexandria, features of pharaonic architecture in Alexandria. So, Kathrin, thank you that you have time for us today. The audience is now yours.
Yes, hello and good day to everybody from sunny Alexandria. I send a lot of greetings to everybody, and I want to thank the organizers of this gathering, of this webinar, and I feel very honored that I have been invited, and this will give me the possibility to share a little bit of my studies and of my researches. So I'm gonna launch my PowerPoint. I hope everything will work. So thank you, Wesam, for your introduction. And yeah, you skipped out, of course, the very long centuries of the Islamic history of Alexandria. So today in my presentation, we will see what is left over of the medieval fortifications and what we can rebuild, or what we can know, which information we can know about from the historical and the pictorial sources. Right. Okay. As a little reminder, in the Middle Ages, in the 13th century, Egypt fell under the rule of the Mamluk sultans. The Mamluks was a dynasty of slave soldiers, and they ruled over what is nowadays Egypt, Syria, and the Hijaz, which means a part of Saudi Arabia. And as you can see, Alexandria is on the shore of the Mediterranean, and it was a very important seaport. And at the same time, it was always a target for seaborne attacks, and it had to suffer from many raids. The layout of the medieval city was quite different from nowadays. So as Wesam already mentioned, we have a very big harbor, and the city had been founded on a stretch of land in between Mediterranean and the Lake Mariot. In the little dot line, you can see the outline of the ancient city walls, which came from the Greek and the Roman times. But when Cairo was founded, further down south in Egypt, Alexandria lost a little bit of its signification, and the city started to shrink. So the inhabited neighborhoods or districts, they came closer to the two ports, the two harbors, the Western Harbor and the Eastern Harbor, and a new city wall was constructed around those neighborhoods. Since the city was so much in danger always of those attacks, the sultans obliged Alexandrians to live within the city walls. Nobody was allowed to construct their buildings outside on the peninsula in between the two harbors. And of course, the two harbors were fortified by some towers and little fortresses. As of the middle of the 19th century, the municipality of Alexandria started to demolish the fortifications and the city walls. This is just something we can observe everywhere in Europe also. In the 19th century, in the modern cities, those medieval fortifications usually were not of much use anymore. So in Alexandria, they started to destroy first the stretch of the city walls in between the two harbors, and then step by step, they went all around. And here we are in the 1920s, already nothing is left of the city walls. And if you have a look at nowadays Alexandria on a photo from Google Earth, I can show you again that the city walls are still visible in the urban fabric. So some streets follow the outline and the trace of the city walls. We have basically from the fortifications, 4 buildings were kept by the municipality as urban heritage, as monuments. The rest of this fortification was turned into a garden. We have the very big gate before that Wesam already showed on one photo. And as to the city, the medieval city doesn't exist anymore. So there are no ancient buildings here. Just cisterns, big water tanks that are underground. And the real historical Alexandria nowadays is what we call the Turkish town on the peninsula. And I will explain later how this Turkish town was founded and how it grew. So Cape Before is of course a very nice spot for visits. Many tourists come here, and it's very much loved also by Egyptians. Many school classes come to spend the day there. And as you see, it looks quite medieval, but it also looks very fresh. This is the reason is because it was reconstructed. So you can see on an old photo from the 1920s that at this time it was in a very, very poor state. In fact, it had been demolished by bombarding in an event in 1882, when there was an Egyptian uprising against the European supremacy. And the Europeans, especially the British fleet, was bombarding Alexandria, and they tried to extinguish, and they managed to extinguish all the fortifications. So Cape Before, already the enclosure wall was in a very poor state, and the main tower that was higher had to be brought down to half of it. So only the ground floor was preserved, and the upper floors, they were gone, and they were reconstructed later. Now we come to this part of the city walls where I said earlier that 4 monuments still exist. It's called the Shalalat Gardens, and I'm sitting here. So we are very close to the old walls and to some of the towers. So first of all, it's Shalalat Towers, Shalalat Garden. Shalalat means waterfalls. So as you can see, it's green, and there's a little pond in the middle. And this tower seems to have 2 stages. For those who are familiar with Islamic architecture, the left part was probably built under the Ayyubids in the 12th century, which can be easily recognized by the very big blocks in the masonry, rectangular, and also by the rectangular layout. And obviously in Mamluk times, so from the 14th to 15th century, something like this, an extension was built. And it's very clear in the difference of the masonry, because here the blocks are very much smaller, and also the shape is rounded, which is something you find very often in Mamluk towers. The second tower that I would count to the medieval towers is the one in the football stadium. It was also kept as a monument, and it was integrated in the enclosure wall of the stadium. You can see it here. It was certainly restored by the Ottomans, if not even constructed. And one feature that tells us that it's a modern fortification, or part of the modern fortification, is what we call the cordon that runs around the facade in the upper part. And that shows us that it most probably was restored by the Ottomans. Now, those two towers, they were the angle towers of the city walls, and in between, in the curtain wall, there was one of the very important gates of Alexandria, the Rosetta Gate. It's called like this because it was the opening for the caravans coming from the countryside, and also from the city of Rosetta. So, you know, the Rosetta Stone was found in one fortress there. It's totally destroyed. Today, nothing is left of it. But since it was an important gate, of course, we have some engravings, we have some pictures, and we know quite well how this gate might have looked. So it was a very high gate with two flanking towers that can be easily identified as being Fatimid from the 10th to the 12th century, and especially by comparing to a similar gate in Cairo, the Bab el-Futuh, that was built in the 11th century, we see that it's quite similar with the rounded towers. In the 19th century, Wesam already mentioned the family of Muhammad Ali. So we are in the Ottoman period now, in the very end of the Ottoman period. And Muhammad Ali was a very big reformer of Egypt. In fact, Egypt was still under Ottoman rule. Muhammad Ali was a pasha under the Ottoman Sultan, but he was very ambitious, and he tried to reach independence for Egypt. And Alexandria at this time was living a very big renaissance. So before, it has been almost like a little fisherman village. And now many people, many foreigners were attracted. They came to Alexandria. They settled down in Alexandria. The trade went up, especially for cotton. And the city was really, in very few decades, was expanding tremendously. And Muhammad Ali, in his ambitions to become independent, also saw that it is necessary for Alexandria and the Mediterranean coast to have some new fortifications. So on the very important Rosetta Gate, he decided to make a ceinture, bastionnement, if I may say it in French, with the 5 bastions, protecting each of the medieval towers and fortifying the gate. So all those do not exist anymore. They were also brought down when the municipality brought the city walls down, and they transformed it into a garden. But 2 buildings are still there. One is a little storehouse that is called Tabiat Nahassin, or Nahassin 4. It's part of the bastion number 1. You can see it on the picture here. In fact, it's a 2-story storehouse, and most probably it was used in Muhammad Ali time to store ammunition, weapons. This building now belongs to the Ministry of Antiquity, to the Islamic department. And since the end of the 1990s, Centre d'études Alexandrines is entitled to use this building as a storehouse for the archaeological finds. So we have all the 2 stories, we restored them, and we made them ready to receive all the boxes. And we have study rooms, and we have workshops for restoration of the artifacts and of mosaics. The second monument of the 19th century fortification is the bastion number 3. It's a very big bastion. It's a terre-plein, which means it's totally filled with earth. And there are only like 3 very tiny underground rooms in it. And it's also part of the garden. Just to mention one last thing, about this fortification. So Muhammad Ali gave the order to build those fortifications to a French engineer, Barthélemy Galis. He was called from France, and he came to Alexandria, where he spent a couple of years, and he made the very big and important project of those fortifications. As I said earlier, especially the northern stretch of the city walls totally disappeared, but we have some pictorial sources that can tell us about another important tower and another important gate. I will first show you the tower. So this is how he would look from inside. It was a round tower, and well, we are lucky to have all the documents that were produced by the engineers and the scholars that came with the troops of Napoleon Bonaparte. They arrived in Alexandria in July of 1798. And Napoleon Bonaparte was very wise, because after his campaign in Italy, he knew that it's very important to have all those scholars to make a complete inventory of the country they were in. So he had all kinds of scientists and a lot of architects that made the drawings of everything they saw, all the buildings, and very precise topographical surveys. So Balzac was one of them. And this tower was still standing at the beginning of the 20th century, but you can see all in a very quite poor state. And it was totally demolished when the city was refurbished and all those grounds were reconstructed with modern buildings. Now the sea gate is the gate in between the two harbors. And this was the biggest gate of Alexandria. And in fact, it's not only a door, it's a big complex. As you can see, it stretches from here to there. It was a big complex with a wall. And on the corners, there were massive towers. It was so important because Alexandria, as I said earlier, was so important for the trading. So when the foreigners and the Christian travelers came, they had to anchor in the Eastern Harbor, and then they were obliged to enter the city by the sea gate. They entered by this door in the tower, and then they came into this big compound where they had their goods inspected, and only when they had passed the customs, they were allowed to enter the city and then to find their accommodation in one of the hotels, the vicalas, in the medieval city. And also this one, by some inscriptions and by the written sources, we know it's from the Fatimid era. Now let's talk about one of the very horrible attacks that Alexandria had to suffer from. So we are in 1365 in the Mamluk period. And here something had happened that was mentioned earlier. The lighthouse, the famous lighthouse that had been built in ancient times, had collapsed. There was an earthquake in 1303, and now in the 14th century, the Pharos was lying in ruins. Unfortunately, because it was not only a landmark for the sailors that came to Alexandria, but it was also a fortification to protect the city, and especially the north coast of Pharos Island. And now, with this place lying in ruins, finally Alexandria was open. So the troops of Cyprus, under their guidance or under their leader, Pierre de Lusignan, came to Alexandria to riot it. In fact, they said it's part of the Crusades and it's the Holy War, but finally they knew Alexandria is rich and they wanted to take advantage of it. Their ships managed to enter the harbor and they managed to enter the city, and they stayed for 1 week, rioting, killing people, and destroying many of the fortifications. You can see my little explosion stars. So you see they targeted the city gates and they targeted the important fortifications. There were also some watchtowers on the peninsula that they burned down. This event was so traumatizing for the Egyptians and for Alexandrians that in the 15th century, Sultan Kaytbay, Sultan Ashraf Kaytbay, which was a very famous and well, excellent ruler for the Egyptians, he decided to construct a new fortress on this spot, on the ruins of the lighthouse. And it seems that the construction was done by a German slave, which wouldn't be unusual. He was from Oppenheim on the Rhine. We don't know how he came to Egypt, but it was a common thing that people like this, they were traveling around the world, and at one point they might be sinking to their ships and they managed to come to land, but then they fell under the hands of the Muslims and became slaves. But I guess this guy was a really good engineer, so he made a kind of career, and he was the one in charge of constructing the fort, which is a main tower, the keep, with an enclosure wall. Very soon after this, Sultan el-Ruri fortified the castle again by a second wall, because he was very much afraid of the Ottomans that were already conquering a lot of countries in the Mediterranean. Centre d'études Alexandrines has been working on the Pharos site since the 1990s. In fact, on a yearly basis, our diving team is doing some underwater excavations on the east here. There are millions, no, not millions, I'm exaggerating, but there are many, many blocks lying there, architectural blocks, statues, pillars, and they are all put into a cartographical system. They are all being examined. Some of them are being lifted to be put in the museum. So already, I mean, we are working here, and in 2001, we get the permit to also examine and excavate within the boundary of the fortress in the courtyard. Well, of course, we had the little hope to find maybe the foundations of the lighthouse, but we didn't have enough space to excavate, so it was not successful. But we found the water supply system of the Mamluks with 2 cisterns beside the main tower. The first cistern is in a very good conservation state, and it can be visited today. There was some staircase that the Antiquities Service built. And it's a very typical architecture for cisterns in Alexandria. Well, one could think that Alexandria is not lacking water, since there's the Mediterranean to the north and Lake Mario to the south. But as a matter of fact, there's not enough sources with drinkable water. So Alexandria was always needing water from the Nile. There was a canal that was linking the city to the Nile. And on a yearly basis, the cisterns were filled with the Nile water. So this is one of the examples. All the other ones in the city that sometimes are even bigger were abandoned and cannot be visited today. So what is very typical about this is that the tanks were big, and in order to be able to close the roof, they didn't have reinforced concrete. They needed to divide the space. So there were ranges of pillars that would support little arches and domes or barrel vaults. And these pillars are all spolias. So the architects then, they found all these pieces of architecture in the ruins of ancient Alexandria. And one of the examples is this capital that is from the late 4th century after Christ. And this is, again, something very, very common we find in the cisterns of Alexandria. Below, you see the shaft that allowed for workmen to enter the cistern when they had to do the maintenance and the cleaning before filling it again. The little holes were like steps in a ladder. During our excavation next to this cistern, we found another cistern. So now you recognize already the architecture underground with the walls around and with some pillars standing upright. But here, the roof doesn't exist anymore. It had collapsed, and the cistern was totally filled with earth when we discovered it. The archaeological founds and the ceramics is being studied presently, and it will be hopefully published soon. So here we excavated the cistern until the ground, and again you can see the granite pillars and another capital that is a little bit earlier from the 2nd to 3rd century after Christ. Now, of course, the question is, why would a big cistern like this that was so important for the garrison, why would this be abandoned and filled? And we will answer this question later. But here on the section drawing, you see how the cistern was serving the architecture of the citadel. In fact, the first cistern is connected to the main tower by an underground corridor, and it opens vertically into the ground floor of the main tower, very close to the mosque. So of course the garrison, it was Mamluk, Muslim soldiers, and they needed to have a praying place, and the water was there for them to allow for their ablutions. We didn't find any connection between the first cistern and the second one, but this might be due to the fact that part of the cistern was covered by this new construction of a ramp, so we couldn't excavate in this part. Now, all the efforts that the Mamluk sultans did to protect Alexandria and Egypt finally didn't work out. Egypt was conquered by the Ottoman troops in 1516. And now you see that Alexandria changed totally its position, geopolitically speaking. Now it's a city within the borders of the country. It's not a border town anymore, but it's within the empire. Ottoman were ruling Egypt, Syria, and of course Turkey, and what would be Greece today. And what is interesting also is that Alexandrians, they were more loyal finally to the Ottomans because they had so many connections with Istanbul and with the Mediterranean that they were not so much interested by the local authorities that stayed in Cairo. And here on this map, drawn by a sailor, by Ottoman geographer Piri Reis in the beginning of the 16th century, we see already what is happening to the city by this changement. People, Alexandrians, they started to settle outside the city walls. Now there was no prohibition anymore. And for them, it was much more advantageous to be on the peninsula closer to the two harbors. You can see Cape B4 still guarding the harbor. And something very interesting that was drawn by Piri Reis is that the medieval city in the south already starts to fall in ruins. So this is the map of Ottoman Alexandria, the Ottoman town on the peninsula, and the buildings that stayed, that were preserved within the city walls, were especially international souks and the local souks. And, well, as I mentioned before, the ruins, but very soon also the souks would be located on the Ottoman town. Now, the Ottomans, they focused in the maintenance of the fortifications of Alexandria. They focused mainly on the two harbors, and especially on the western harbor, which was the one for the Turkish Armada, so the war fleet. And here they constructed a new little fortress. And again, this fortress doesn't exist anymore, but we have the drawings done by the engineers of Napoleon Bonaparte. And we can see that it's a small fort with an enclosure wall with some circular buttresses. And in the middle, we have a tiny keep, a little tower, and also it has a cistern underground. When we compare this to other forts in the province of Egypt, we see that it looks very similar to the Qusair fort, which is in Upper Egypt on the shore of the Red Sea. But in the capital, Cairo, the Ottomans, they reacted in a quite different way, because there they really had to show symbolically that they are the new masters of Egypt. So in the citadel, they constructed some huge artillery towers to really show their dominance on Egypt and the former Mamluks. Coming back to Alexandria, the city walls were preserved by the Ottomans. They were not that important anymore. And we still have remains of the occupation of the medieval tower. So you can see the arches, the original arches that were filled with walls to give space for new rooms, adding another floor. Here the same, you find the original arch and you have 2 new floors. People liked to settle in the towers because they were really perfect accommodations. They were very well built, and there were cisterns also connected to the city walls. Now let's have a quick look of what is left of the urban heritage in the Turkish town. So by the end of the 17th century already, most of the medieval city was abandoned, and Alexandria was basically located on the peninsula. And we keep as one of the very fine monuments of this time a Wikala, that is a hotel for the travelers. It's a very big building. In the ground floor, usually there would be boutiques and shops. Here you can see the gate that was leading to a mosque. And on the behind of the building, there were the accommodations for the travelers. And in the ground floor around the courtyard, they could store their merchandises for the trading. Since the travelers, they came, of course, with the very precious goods. Those 3 colors were built like little fortresses. And you can see the entrances were fortified, but the gates could be closed. And here you find a very deep entrance corridor. There was a guardian sitting. The doors would be closed at night and on Fridays. So yeah, not to let the travelers out, but also to protect them from any lootage or rioting and stealing. The Ottomans, of course, also occupied the very important Kabe fort. They settled a garrison inside, and they also did some modifications to the fort. So now we will see why this cistern was abandoned and filled. On the map drawn by the engineers of the French army at the end of the 18th century, we can see that on the spot of the cistern, there is an artillery platform. So it seems the Ottoman, they needed the space. They needed to construct this platform close to the northern wall, able to target on the ships coming from abroad. And by this, the cistern was too close to the wall. It had to be filled. And I guess it was with some regret that they abandoned a very important water tank like this. Another thing that the Ottomans changed in the fortress was that they constructed some barracks in the courtyard. You can still see them here, as they were drawn by the French engineers. But Bonaparte gave the order to demolish them all because he wanted to reset the fortress into a real fortification, not having any accommodation or any barracks in the courtyard. And this is how it looks today. So you have the same view on the main tower, but without all these little houses. Another thing that the Ottoman certainly restored was the floor of the mosque. So you see a very elaborate mosaic with a lot of tiny details in geometrical pattern with an interlaced star. And if you compare this to mosaics in the Mamluk period, now especially the mausoleum of Sultan Kabe in Cairo, this is much simpler. It's also done on a geometrical design, but it cannot be compared at all to what we find in Kabe before. But if we look at other buildings in Cairo, in Ottoman Cairo, we see here we have the same kind of design. We have the star pattern, we have the interlacing, we have the tiny details. And at this time, it was even a feature of domestic architecture to be found in the palaces and houses of Cairo. In our excavations, we have some of the tiles. And of course, as you know, in Islam, especially in mosques, the representation of human beings was forbidden. So Islamic artists would rely on calligraphy, on vegetal decoration, on arabesque, and on geometrical pattern. So this is one of the tiles we found in the excavation, and how it would be put into place in an architecture of an Ottoman house. Another very important and very frequent object that we find in our excavations are the chibuk, the clay tobacco pipes. As you can see here, this man is smoking one of them. So the little heads were done out of clay pottery, and it was put on a very long wooden tube, and he would smoke it. So we do find them. They come in all designs, all shapes and variations. They can be very bold and plain, and they can be very much decorated. They can be round, or they can be rather in a kind of lily shape. And this is something that is very frequent in our excavations. So we are leaving the Mamluks and the Ottomans. We are coming to the end of my presentation. We come back to modern Alexandria. And as you see, again, the outline of the city walls that seem to be tiny in modern Alexandria, the Turkish city on the peninsula. And Alexandria keeps expanding from the 19th century during all 20th century. It grew and grew and grew. So for those who visited Alexandria in the 1990s, it changed a lot. And it keeps expanding, especially to the east and to the west, because the ground is limited by the sea and by the lake in the south. So there's not much place. And I think you also understood why not much is left of ancient Alexandria and medieval Alexandria, because the grounds are so precious that they need to be reconstructed if possible. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very, very amazing and interesting presentation of the rich history and culture and the fortifications of Alexandria. Yes, I give the word to Dieter for the discussion. Please, can you, yes, thank you.
Right. So, thank you very, very much for this very interesting lecture. And we have a first question from Zaydet Stuart Yurshai. I hope it's right, sorry. Please write it down.
I'll try to give him a voice, just a moment.
Okay. In the meantime, maybe I can get a question.
So the channel is open
wonderful.
for Stereo, but he has to unmute.
Okay,
yeah.
Hello. Again, my name is Sujudi Joshari. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Thank you very much for this presentation. The presentation, I mean, I had a question. You talked about everything. You talked about the architecture, urbanization, about the people, caravan, and you showed lots of different pictures and photos from mosques and after communication of people. For example, I wrote one of them here. It shows that Alexandria in the past time was an Ottoman, I want to say, it was under Ottoman influence. The question is here, you know, when we talk about the Ottoman Empire, we talk about the Sunni Muslim. But we know that between 16th and until 18th century, 19th century, we had in Iran, in Persia, the Shiite dynasties, Safavid Empire and Qajar Empire. Could be, especially in the time of Safavid, because Mamluk was very important for Safavid Shahs, for example, Shah Ismail or Shah Abbas the First, for example. Can we find the Shiite influence in Alexandria? Could we find Shiite influence in Alexandria? And a little this is the first question. The second question, according to the Fatimid dynasty in 13th century, if I said it correctly, Fatimid dynasty is a Shiite dynasty. How was the relation in the city in Alexandria between Sunni and Shiite people? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. You're going very deep into details. and you're bringing us on a religion ground that it might be a bit difficult, but well, you cannot totally compare Persia, of course, to Egypt. So your first question was if there's any remains of Shia influence in Alexandria. No, there isn't. Egyptians are Sunni. And in fact, yes, the short period, or well, the 2 centuries of Shia rule from the Fatimid, you might find it in Cairo, but not in Alexandria anymore. And as you know, when Salahuddin El Ayyub came, he brought back Sunnism to Egypt. But okay, then all the other questions with the Safavid and how it was going between Mamluks and this is, well, it's a very wide field to discuss.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next one is Mirna Ali. Rainer, do you will open the channel?
Yeah, I'll try to open the channel. Here you are. Mirna, are you able to speak?
It's a question about the cistern, I think.
So the channel is open.
Yeah, so can you hear me right now, right? Hello?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It's really interesting and rich in information. So my first question is, are the cisterns connected to the main irrigation system of Alexandria from the Nile River? The number of cisterns I have found in the number of fortifications. So I was wondering from where the water exactly was coming as where the excavation work. The second question regarding the Muhammad Ali fortifications, where exactly the second photo is located in the modern Alexandria. And thank you again for your presentation.
Okay, so yes, Mirna, you might go to the map of the Description de l'Egypte, of the big map of Alexandria, and there you will find the canal and the 5 branches, the 5 arms of the canal that led the water from the Nile inside the city. So this is for us the basic documentation of the water system. And then how the water was distributed to every single cistern, this is another thing. But if you look closely at the maps, you will find that there were a lot of sakyas everywhere. And this was, as you know, a way to transport and lift water. So we know each other, so I can give you some other recommendations, like if you have our catalogue of the exhibition around water thing in Alexandria, you might find many articles inside this. Is this okay for you, or you want me to?
Yeah. So you mean like this is connected to the irrigation system, right? It's not like storage cisterns.
Well, the water that came from the Nile was running water, and then it ended up in the cisterns. It was that, well, there was a whole thing about basins where the water would be stored and cleared before they put it into the cisterns. And in the cistern, of course, it was stable. Yeah. It was stagnating water. And then water was, the cisterns were open to the public, some of them, and people could come and bring the water up. Also the sakyas, or there were ways of with little pots to bring the water up.
Okay, so this makes sense right now. I just need to know where exactly the main phase before getting into the cistern, so I can understand exactly the network of the water.
The nature of the water.
The network. The network.
The network. Yeah. The problem, of course, is that we don't have enough excavations and archaeological data to really tell it. We can only go by the old documents.
Yes.
But usually also the written sources, they say clearly that the water was brought in the canal from the Nile and then treated somehow or cleared and put into the cisterns. But of course, well, this water was drinkable, but it was not very good water. And we were talking about pandemics before and diseases. Yes, it was very hard for people to drink from this water. Napoleon's soldiers were not very happy about this. They had to drink it. They didn't have their wine, so they were kind of crying. And yeah, and the cisterns were closed down by the municipality of Alexandria in the beginning of the 20th century due to those to cholera and all those things that kept spreading, and because the water was just not good enough to be drunk. I mean, if you have anything falling inside, you need 1 or 2 rats that die and that are floating there. It's not very nice to drink from this water.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And your second question was where I took the photo of the bastion. Of the yes. How can I explain to you? Well, you know where the bastion is, of course, in Shalalat Garden. Yes. You visited.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's south of Shara Abuir, and you will have one of the angles. Yeah, you just go there, you visit. It's very lovely now with all the trees in the red flowers, the flamboyant. So.
Yeah, no, I got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question. Now, David has a question, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I've very much enjoyed both of the talks, and I think I really like the way the two work together over the sort of you got the sort of really long-term life history of Alexandria and then the much more focusing on the fortifications during the Mamluk period as well. And I'm just thinking there seems to be there's always there's a permanent sort of dual set of stories about construction and destruction, reconstruction and destruction, and again and again and again, being cycles around and around and all these things. And particularly coming through with Wesam set up really interestingly, the sort of more than most cities, I'd say, in the world, Alexandria has got a claim to hold a very prominent place in the sort of global histories of scholarship and of trade connections. But there's a sort of other stories, there's hidden stories, although sometimes less hidden than others, in terms of sort of a colonial power and colonial power relations and colonial violence, and the stories, Napoleon and the engineers turning up to make beautiful paintings and pictures of the fortifications, but obviously they're not there just as on an art tour. And so there's a sort of these two sides of things going on at the same time. I think in some ways it comes through quite nicely just right at the end of Wesam's talk, where she suddenly talked about Alexandria as the home of the Egypt's most prominent serial killers. And I thought, oh, there's always a dark side to this somewhere underneath. And I'm just thinking how these two stories of Alexandria are conveyed to visiting publics and conveyed in the museum and in the literature these days. How are these stories articulated to visitors?
Yeah, well, tourism, it's a bit difficult. I mean, there are really a lot of nice places to be visited. The thing is that since the revolution in 2011, we already had much less individual tourists coming to Alexandria. And usually even what is happening when the cruise boats still came. So they were coming from Greece, Turkey, landing in the harbor, and they would put the tourists into buses to drive down to the pyramids in Gizeh, 4 hours. Nice, visiting, coming back 4 hours in Alexandria. But there are many places to visit, but somehow they are hidden, yes. There's some spots like the Cape before, Wesam, she showed the necropole of Komel Shugafar. Yes, this is the famous spots, and the other spots, they are maybe a little bit underrated. And it's different in Cairo. Maybe more people will go and they will lose themselves in the little alleys and walk around and discover. In Alexandria, we have this much less. It would be possible, but it's also what Ministry of Archaeology wants to do, what the municipality wants, if they want to engage in those programs. Now, as Wesam said, the Greco-Roman Museum is under construction. It was closed for quite a long time. It will open soon. Yes, there are many things to visit, but it's more difficult. And I wouldn't even recognize, I wouldn't even I wouldn't even tell any tourist, any foreigner to go to the Turkish town and to discover by themselves. Mm-hmm. It's not like in Cairo, you go to the Khan el-Khalili, people are used to the foreigners, just go. Here, you go to the Turkish town, there's a part that is open to foreigners, I mean, even Alexandrians that do not live in this neighborhood. You can go, there are shops, but very soon you will cross borders, invisible borders, and you come into little districts that are really, really private. And then you might experience that the people living there are not so nice, and they are not so happy that you come there, and the children might throw stones at you. So it's a very delicate thing. We are in a living city, and even the souk, nowadays souk in Manshaya is not for tourists, it's for the people.
I guess having stones thrown at me is something I do remember from 1990 as well, strangely enough. That's something you don't change. But I guess it connects as well to the other question I've got here, is that sort of methodologically, I find it interesting that you use a lot of the Napoleonic and the sort of photographs from the 19th, even early 20th century. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of, I don't know, oral histories or discussions with people about, even if it's a sort of a genealogical oral history that might not be something in their lifetime, but they remember their grandparents talking about such and such fortification or such and such thing that is no longer, that might have been destroyed 100 years ago. Yeah. And I don't know if there's other means through which to approach some of these elements in the Alexandrian landscape beyond the sort of photographs and plans of surveyors.
Well, for the fortifications, you're totally right. It's too far away. It's too long gone. So the people that remember them, they're not living anymore. But we have a very big program in the Centre d'études Alexandrines of archivage. So I greet Marie-Delphine, who is the head of this department. So, well, we are collecting all what is related to French newspapers. We have a very, very big archive now. It's all being digitalized. It's all being put on our website. So this is the more recent documents. And sometimes we will find things and articles and photos of monuments or of just buildings that have disappeared. So for all what is modern Alexandria, 20th century Alexandria, we are very much interested in those studies, but they don't touch the fortifications that much. So,
I guess related to these things, it just struck me the photograph you have of the football ground with the Ottoman fort and the tower in the corner of it. Yes. And I thought, there can't be many football grounds in the world with with a sort of 500-year-old fortification actually architecturally part of the football ground. You just think there must be some really interesting stories going along to contemporary football fans about the role of that fortification within their contemporary ground. It must be, it's a very unusual feature to have in a football ground.
Yeah, it is indeed, yes. Well, I mean, it was monument. It was put on the list of the monuments to be preserved. So it's standing there, and the architect who planned the football stadium, he integrated this feature into the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, I think Christian first raised his yellow hand, so it's yours.
Thank you, Dieter. Yes, first I have to say it is a little bit funny that a master builder from southwestern Germany has built one of the most exciting and important examples of fortress architecture, medieval fortress architecture in Egypt, that he has built that and planned. But to my question, Kathrin, you have told us that the medieval town was abandoned since the 17th century, and there are no traces longer to be seen of this medieval town. But what happened to the mosques? There were important buildings. Were they also abandoned? Fell they in ruins, or what happened to them?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the shifting of the city to the peninsula started so early as of the 16th century, step by step, that even the very big mosques that were known and they are still appearing on the maps of the 18th century, they don't exist anymore. There were two congregational mosques. And we even went one day with some colleagues to see if by chance we find anything. There's nothing. The only thing is that sometimes the grounds are preserved in the urban fabric. That's all. It's totally disappeared. The mosques that are being preserved are the ones in the Turkish town. But medieval Alexandria, it's a very interesting thing, because when you visit Cairo, you will have the Fatimid Cairo, and it's still there, and you will find the Mamluk monuments without any problem, and it's been restored, Shara Muaz and all this. But I hope I made it clear that the situation for Alexandria is totally different. There is not much space. Cairo could expand to the north, to the east, to the south. I mean, okay, there's the Nile and there's Mokattam Hill, but still there's much more space for a big city to grow. But nowadays, if you heard of President Al-Sisi's project to construct a totally new capital in the desert, also it means that Cairo, even though it's really big and huge, became too small. But Alexandria, we have this natural boundaries, the sea. Well, we can try, of course, like in Dubai, to create some artificial islands, but it will never be enough. At the time, they are filling up the Lake Mariut in order to gain land to construct on. Yeah, but the city is expanding in a tremendous speed, and now it's on 60 kilometers length along the northern shore. It's never ending.
Right. So, and the next question is coming from Rainer.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, Wesam and Kathrin. Kathrin, you showed us this marvelous pictures from Chibuk tobacco pipes, and in Northern Europe and Central Europe, the bulk of tobacco pipes is produced in the Netherlands. Where do the tobacco pipes in Egypt come from?
This is still, a subject I do researches on. Of course, there was imported chibuks. This is very clear. And I started to compare the pipes that we found in our excavations to the publications of other excavations in Turkey and in Central Europe. And I could notice that the typology is quite different. Some of the features are the same, some of the models are the same, but there seems to be a local variety. And what is quite clear, that it was an object that was quite easy to produce. So we know from the excavations that was done in the city walls of Cairo by IFAO, they found a kiln where those pipes were produced. And it's not big, it has a diameter of 1 meter only. So I'm pretty sure that in Cape before there must have been one or more kilns to produce them, but we didn't find them. So there's local production and imported production. I think this, what I call the little potatoes, the very plain ones, for sure, they were done on the spot. And the more elaborate, they were maybe also a sign of luxury, or I don't know what, of richness, might be imported.
Thank you.
All right. So I have a last question. If I really understand, there wasn't a castle with a palace or a residence like in Alexandria. Isn't it right or it's wrong?
Which building you're talking about?
A castle in the European meaning, with a palace or a residence.
No, not in Mamluk and not in Ottoman time.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Cape before was for the garrison, and the commander had his rooms there, but it was not in the sense of a residence to show the power.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, in the early medieval times in Alexandria, there was the governor's palace.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we don't have anything. It's, yeah, this district is totally reconstructed, and I don't even have any pictures of it. It's only mentioned in the written sources, and it was not on the peninsula. It was really in the city center, in the old city center, Intramuros. No, there's no sign of any Ottoman or Mamluk palace, but Muhammad Ali, that is in the very end of the Ottoman occupation, he constructed a palace, of course, in Alexandria. Yeah.
Okay, and then Wesam, you still there? Or maybe I have a question for you. I've forgotten. I want to ask you these catacombs. Where do you build this? Also as a Christian, like in Rome?
Well, during the Roman period, but still the kind of art and the burial of the people there are kind of a mix between the Greco-Roman traditions and the ancient Egyptian traditions. Mm-hmm. So we have some kind of carvings, for example, for some ancient Egyptian artistic symbols, but in the Greco-Roman style, especially with the clothes and other kind of stuff. And also we have inside the catacombs some burials for the animals, not only for humans. I am sure that there is one burial for a horse, and it's thought that this horse was a kind of champion for sports or something like this.
Mummies, or
if I could hear the question correctly, because I have a problem with the internet.
All right. Okay. Then thank you. Chris, you want to say anything else?
Yes, I have also a question to Kathrin. Did I have thing right that the layout of Kite Bay Fortress has in the middle the mosques in form of a cross, something like a courtyard with 4 livans, like in the Persian architecture, and around the rooms for the garrison?
Yes.
So it is something like a madrasa. Is it in the tradition of the Mamluk madrasas? And do we have something like an Islamic order inside?
In Islamic what?
Order. Something like there are on the North African coast, there are some early castles of Muslim brotherhoods who were in a society living in such a castle with a mosque. Mm-hmm. Is it something like that?
Well, yes, it's a very good remark. It's completely the madrasa style. And the madrasa style was very popular under the Mamluks. And it's just to explain for those who are not so familiar with the mosque architecture, especially in Cairo, in the beginning of the settlement of the city, there was a lot of space. So the rulers constructed very big mosques around a very big courtyard, and they were very spacious. Then when Cairo got to be more and more dense in the population, they had to come to another layout that was matching the smaller grounds to build upon. And in the Mamluk area, where the city was already quite full, they came to adopt this madrasa style. Oops, I'm sorry. Which is the cross plan, the cross layout mosque. And this allowed for the space to shrink. And also it's a sign, or it's a symbol for the Sunni Islam with the 4 Sunni schools. And well, in the keep, it's a very interesting because the keep, the main tower in Cape before, is not only a fortification, it's really a hybrid building. It has all the defensive things, it has the meurtrière and protège and all you need, but inside there's a religious building. Yes.
So that's why I thought for, I know now again the correct word for ribat. Ribat is one of this. A Muslim brotherhood lives inside. Yes. Yes. And it is a brotherhood of warriors, of Muslim warriors.
Yeah,
the early time of Islam.
The ribats, they did exist in Alexandria, but more in the Ayyubid time in the 12th century.
Yes.
And usually the ribats would be built on the outskirts or on the borders of Islam. So on the peninsula, that was extramuros of medieval Alexandria, there were a lot of those rebats. And it seems that even the lighthouse at some time was considered as being a rebat.
Yes, okay. So,
yeah.
So it's clear.
But Cape before is already something different.
Thank you.
All right. So the people from the first question had another question. You're welcome.
Can I ask the question? Okay. Yeah, I have another question. According to the Ottoman language, or the languages that in German we call Wohlkunnarsprachen, it means that the languages that can be used only on a street, for example, between the people, for example, simple people, of course. But the language, like, for example, if we want to compare with European history, we can give an example about German language, the influence of German language or French language in the past time in Middle Ages, sorry, or in the medieval Europe, early medieval Europe, early modern Europe, and comparison or compare with Latin language. I mean, the place of or the influence of Latin language in Europe. So according to the Mamluk and Alexandria, especially the city of Alexandria, I want to ask this question, that how important the Ottoman language in the city was, and which languages could be used more. Arabic language, of course, classic Arabic language, I want to say the old Arabic language, or Ottoman language. Yeah, thank you.
Well, you know, I'm an architect, I'm not a linguist. But Alexandria is a cosmopolitan city. So in the actual Arabic, Wesam already, she mentioned that we Alexandrians, we talk another Arabic than the Cairene people. And we keep a lot of Ottoman and Turkish words in the language. And also Italian and French. So yeah, you will hear very often when you come visit Alexandria, you will hear a guy shouting Roba Vecchia, Roba Vecchia. And this is the guy who's collecting the old clothes. It comes from Italian. So we do have a lot of influence of many, many words. And sometimes we also laugh because on maps you will find translation and retranslation, translation coming from French. Like I give this example, we had a Point Robert. We were thinking, who could be this Monsieur Robert? Why is it Point Robert? We translated back, and finally we found it's not Robert, it's repère, the reference point. So there are many things happening on the language level and the influences. But I cannot give you more examples. Like you have to ask somebody who's more into the subject than I am.
Well, of course, as you said, because you said that you're an architect and you know about architecture, a linguist, you are not a linguist. But I want to say that according to architecture, this can be a good question, you know, to know about the influence of Ottoman language, for example, in the architecture of the city, Alexandria, in the time of Ottoman Empire. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, of course, you will find the inscriptions in Ottoman language on the existing mosques. Like you will find inscriptions. We do have an inscription from Mamluk time in the Cape before. I'm able to read Arabic. I can decipher. I can know some words. But to really study it and to go into depth, this needs a specialist. So this is why, I mean, we work together. One single person cannot accomplish everything. We also need. We always need to share and to work in an interdisciplinary kind of study.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
So, if there isn't any question, I can't see any other question. I give the word back to I think Rainer, who wants to talk first.
So in reality, there's scarcely something I could say. I only can say thank you very much to all participants and to the chair for this gorgeous session here, which was quite interesting. And also thank you very much to the auditory and the attendees for their questions and contributions. Everything that was said today will be post-processed by my wife, Kathrin Arzbach. And in case you don't want to be published on YouTube, please just send me an email and we'll cut out your point. Thank you very much for today and have a nice afternoon.
Also from me, thank you very much. And Frau Wesam, shukran.
So also from me, thank you very much for listening. I wish you all the best. Stay healthy and good time.
Thank you again for having invited me, and it was a very nice discussion. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for all the attendees who listened very patiently.
Thank you all,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.